Hey everybody, and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not News, your favorite podcast about fake news. I'm Beth.
And I'm Kelly.
Hey Kelly, how are you tonight?
I am fantastic. I've been watching the impeachment hearings, which started today. How are you doing?
Gosh, I wanted to watch them so bad, but I was working and I could only watch a little bit, and then I'd have to not watch so I could concentrate on getting my work done. And I was just so sad. I just wanted to watch them with some popcorn.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I had so much to do today that I was popping in and out of watching it, but
I did catch the part where Devin Nunes is just a complete dumpster fire of a person.
Yeah. And you definitely mentioned that, which I think is perfect. Jim Jordan's is also just a complete waste of space. And, everyone wants just to know who the whistleblower is. And I'm like, I'm not sure that any of you understand what a whistleblower is if you just want him to show his face in front of everyone, because that's kind of the point.
Well, if anybody missed it, what Devin Nunes' opening statement and what his closing statement was basically that this was a waste of time. They shouldn't be doing it, that they should be focusing on finding out if Ukraine interfered in the election, and all of he basically listed off all the conspiracy theories that are out there. I'm surprised he didn't bring up the Clintons in some way.
Right.
It was insane. And I was like, you are not seriously in Congress. You're not. You can't be. This is not true. But it is.
Oh, there's a bunch of stupid people in there. I have no idea how half of these people got their jobs. I totally hear you. Yeah, it's wealth and also people who don't have anyone who run against them, unfortunately. That happens a lot.
Get out there and run, people. Come on.
Yeah, for everything. Everything. Not just Congresses or city councils.
No.
Man, there's so many district attorneys that don't ever get challenged, and that makes me hella sad.
Yeah, it's true. There's tons of things you can run for, and anything that you can run for on a local level and as a liberal is good. You got to build the bench.
Yeah.
So definitely. Well, Kelly and I have an announcement to make.
Dun, dun, dun. It's okay.
I don't know if we should start it that way. It's exciting. Well, Kelly and I have been really focused on wanting to be able to do the best possible job that we can for this podcast and for you guys. And we've come to a point where we've had to say that, we are too busy to give this project the attention that it needs in order for it to be a quality product for you guys.
Yeah.
It's really difficult for us to even keep up the 2-a-month schedule, as well as posting with any kind of regularity, which, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's been unfortunate. We've both, I think, have a lot of stuff going on. I know you're doing a lot of support work for political campaigns.
Yes.
I'm doing a lot of support work for the stuff that I do in my area for special education. So
yeah,
it's just, I feel like sometimes we're running out of the oomph that we needed.
The motivation.
I think we want to create a good product.
Yes.
And want to make sure that we source everything that we're looking into and we're giving the best podcast we can give. And sometimes we have needed to take more time because we haven't had the time to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just feel like, we're just kind of running on steam here. Yeah. And I think that's pretty common with podcasts. I mean, when you start them, they're definitely a slow burn to build up viewership, but listenership and, just support and that kind of thing. And, unlike maybe some other podcasts, we don't have people like producers or anybody who does anything for us. It's just us. And, we both have a lot of other responsibilities. So we had to make the tough decision that at this time we are going to be stepping away from the podcast. And so we're going to do this episode and then we're going to do one more. And then that's going to be the last one for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. But we're going to do a really fun wrap up next
Yes.
time, right?
Yes, for sure. And I think, I'm going to try to keep the hosting up on it so that the episodes are still available. And I just kind of look at it as this is my first podcast, because I think that, it was a great experience and great learning. And I just think that there's so much going on with podcasts that I can't see myself living the rest of my life and never doing another podcast again.
Yeah, I would say that that's right. I know when we first started, I was like, oh, my next podcast is going to be this. And I'm like, I don't have time sometimes to do this one and all the other stuff.
Right.
So yeah, it's, I'm definitely right there with you mentally in terms of, I think whatever we go on to do next will be exponentially even better than what we have done so far. And I'm very proud of what we've done and what we've accomplished.
And that's why I want to keep it up. Like, I don't want the episodes to just go away, because I'm still very proud of the work that we've done. And I think that there's still a lot of value in people being able to listen to the episodes.
Yeah. And I mean, fake news is fake news forever.
That's right.
Hopefully it never becomes true news.
I will say this. If you are interested in hosting a podcast about fake news, let me know. Be happy to let you take it over.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Maybe it'll have some motivation, and then we can come on as guests every once in a while. But
I think that would be great.
In the meantime, you have 2 episodes left. So, and this is our last episode in our series of fake news makers, the family tree of fake news makers. And we have the biggest fucking doozy for you. Because I'm going to go first this week, and I'm going to tell Kelly about the unflappable Roger Ailes.
Oh, yeah. I both do and do not want to hear about Roger Ailes.
Yeah, I hear you.
But I have been excited to hear what you have come up with in your synopsis.
Yeah, so hopefully I do this some justice. So I finished watching that miniseries, The Loudest Voice in the Room. And again, I'm going to say, go watch that. It's amazing and very eye-opening. And it is based on a book called The Loudest Voice by Gabe Sherman. He's a writer for The New Yorker, and he had a lot of bombshell type articles in The New Yorker, like with the sexual assault allegations against Roger Ailes, as well as he interviewed a ton of people. And part of what I looked into for my kind of review of Roger Ailes is the veracity of truth of that book. So that's kind of part of what I'm going to get into as well. But let me tell you a little bit about Roger Ailes himself. And again, I rely heavily on Wikipedia.
WikiFeet? Is that what you used?
I use Wikipedia, which I will also throw the shout out that if you have $5 extra, please donate to Wikipedia so that they can keep providing all of this great content.
That's so funny. I just donated today.
Did you really?
They were like, we need your help. And I was like, you know what? I use you all the time. I will help you.
Yep. Yes, you are. Yes, I use you all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So he was obviously the chairman and CEO of Fox News and Fox News Television. Part of when I talked about Donald Trump, I'm going to talk about him a little bit. People are maybe already a little bit familiar with some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So, because I think it is out there enough that it's okay.
Yeah.
So he basically, there's this really great article, and I'm going to just jump over to that. I do have the Wikipedia page open, but I don't think I need to go through the facts like that. There's this really great Rolling Stone article that I read, and it's called How Roger Ailes Built the Fox News Fear Factory. Mm-hmm. It's by Tim Dickinson, and it was originally appeared on June 9th in 2011 issue of Rolling Stone. So this is back when he was still alive. Okay. So some of this information, as far as it goes up to a certain point, but I felt like this really took everything that I knew about Roger Ailes and very well stated it. So I want to go through this article with you. It's pretty long.
Okay.
So basically, Roger Ailes was like the Mao of China at Fox News. Okay. So they talk about the first year that they overtook CNN in the ratings. There was like a Christmas party, and all the Fox News people were at this bar, and up on the TV came, the MSNBC logo, and they're all booing, and then the CNN logo, and they're like, screaming at the TV. And then it brings up a picture of Roger Ailes, and they're all just like cheering and chanting like he's the fucking chairman of, of China. It was nuts. Like the way that they treated him.
Yeah.
He was the man, right? So, and he is Fox News. Like he's the one who really created that image and created this. And this is kind of some background of how he got there, because he just didn't walk out one day and create Fox News, right?
Right.
So one thing I want to mention here is this article does talk about Michael Wolff. Remember Michael Wolff, who wrote the book about Trump that you reviewed?
Yes. What was the name of that book? I remember Michael Wolff's name, and I don't remember, but it was the book where aren't we pretty sure that the main source for that was Steve Bannon?
Yes.
Like he was maybe a third of the sources in that book.
I think it's Under Siege. Fire and Fury. That was the one.
Fire and Fury. That's what it was.
So
yes.
The reason I want to bring him up is, so he spent 9 months embedded with News Corp researching a biography about Murdoch. Okay.
Okay. All right.
So there's an odd friendship between Michael Wolff and Roger Ailes. And if you remember when like Fire and Fury came out, he had put out some articles about like what it was like to have dinner with Roger Ailes and Steve Bannon.
I do remember this.
Michael Wolff is like a liberal, right? But he like spends all these time, like it's the same thing he did with Trump. Like he spent this like 9 months embedded with him, right?
Right.
And like he's very comfortable around these conservative men, but is apparently a liberal. I don't get it. Like, to be honest, like I'm kind of confused about this a little bit. So anyway, that's going to be important a little bit later here.
Okay.
So just remember Michael Wolff, good friends with Roger Ailes. So one of the quotes in here says, "Fear, in fact, is precisely what Ailes is selling. His network has relentlessly hyped phantom menaces like the planned terror mosque near Ground Zero, inspiring Florida pastor Terry Jones to torch the Quran. Privately, Murdoch is as impressed by Ailes' business savvy as he is dismissive of his extremist politics. You know Roger is crazy," Murdoch recently told a colleague, shaking his head in disbelief. "He really believes that stuff." Yeah, he does. So it says here, to watch even a day of Fox News, the anger, the bombast, the virulent, paranoid streak, the unending appeals to white resentment, the reporting that's held to the same standard of evidence as a late October attack ad, is to see the refraction of its founder. He is one of the most skilled and fearsome operatives in the history of the Republican Party. As a political consultant, he repackaged Richard Nixon for television in 1968, papered over Ronald Reagan's budding Alzheimer's in 1984, and shamelessly stoked racial fears to elect George H.W. Bush in 1988. That's the Willie Horton campaign. And waged a secret campaign, I didn't know this one, on behalf of Big Tobacco to derail healthcare reform in 1993.
Oh, I didn't know that one either.
Yeah, I'll get into that too.
Gross.
So that's just kind of a breakdown of what he did. So he claims that he quit politics in 1993, but he didn't. So he just...
No, I mean, we know he didn't.
Yeah. He quit being a out front political strategist and just went behind the scenes.
Okay.
And so this talks about how like he used Fox News to pioneer a new form of political campaign one that enables the GOP to bypass skeptical reporters and wage an all-around-the-clock partisan assault on public opinion. So the network at its core is a giant soundstage created to mimic the look and feel of a news operation, cleverly camouflaged political propaganda as independent journalism. Now, some of this is really getting into like Fox News, but you can't really separate Roger Ailes from Fox News.
Right.
It's like trying to separate the mold from the bread. It's just all in there.
That's a good analogy.
Thank you. I thought so. One of the other things that Fox News did in 2000 is they tilted the electoral balance to George W. Bush when they prematurely declared him president in a move that prompted every other network to follow suit.
I remember that very clearly.
It helped create the Tea Party, transforming it from the butt of late-night jokes into a nationwide insurgency capable of electing U.S. senators.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
I mean, do you remember when they first started and people had those stupid hats with the tea bags hanging down off of them? And everyone was joking about how teabagging was a thing that you would do in video games. Yeah. And sometimes in certain sexual situations.
Right.
But I mean, they were a joke until Fox took them seriously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the quotes in here is, everything Roger wanted to do when he started out in politics, he's now doing 24/7 with his network. Oh. So basically,
we're brought you Ted Cruz.
Yeah, among others. Yeah. So this is another quote that I really thought kind of helps describe him. So it says, friends describe him as loyal, generous, and slap your mama funny. But Ailes, it also by turns, is a tyrant. I only understand friendship or scorched earth, he has said. And one former deputy pegs him as a cross between Don Rickles and Don Corleone. What's fun for Roger is the destruction. When the light bulb goes on and he's got the trick to outmaneuver the enemy, that's his passion. So Ailes was also deeply paranoid. I mean, this guy is like a walking conspiracy theory himself. He was convinced that he's been personally targeted by Al-Qaeda for assassination. And so he surrounded himself with an aggressive security detail, was licensed to carry a handgun, and he also built a bunker in his home so that they could live down there for like months. And he had bulletproof glass in his office. I mean, it was like crazy. Like one of the people described it as they had like gone to lunch with him, and he said it was like literally like the Secret Service, like guarding a president. Like they were ushered out of a restaurant with like 6-man security detail, surrounded to get into the car, which then sped away. And then they get to the office. Another 6-man detail comes out, ushers him in the building. Like he was very, very paranoid.
That is insane.
And, in the movie version or the miniseries version, The Loudest Voice, it really shows some scenes of like his wife, Beth, had really subscribed to these notions as well. And they really believed like all these people were after them and that they were just like under attack all the time. And was
there any credibility to it? Was there any like threats against him? Anything like that?
Think so.
Because honestly, I didn't even realize Roger Ailes was, and I'm fairly plugged in.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that there was a person running Fox News who wasn't Rupert Murdoch until maybe like 5 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, he just definitely felt like the whole world was after him and just, and it's funny because the way he acted was how you see some of these like conspiracy theories that are just crazy.
Yeah.
And they would spout like all of these conspiracy theories all the time. So basically, I'm going to compare Roger Ailes to Hitler a little bit because
that's all right. I'm going to let you do that.
I feel like, how Hitler was rejected from art school and then ended up killing like 6 million people?
Yeah.
And people were like, if he'd only been a better artist, what would the world be like today? Right?
I mean, it might be the same. He might have done the same.
It might be, but that has stuck out to me as something I remembered. And it's kind of the same for Ailes. Okay. So in college, he tried to join the Air Force ROTC, but he was rejected because of his health. So Roger Ailes was a hemophiliac. The
where their blood doesn't clot.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's very easy for him to get hurt and bleed out and things like that. So they did not accept him into the Air Force, which I think was probably the correct decision. But because of that, he became a drama geek and he started going into all of these theater productions. And that really started him on the path towards television. So his first job out of college he was a gopher on the Mike Douglas Show, which was a nationally syndicated daytime variety show that featured stars like Jack Benny or Pearl Bailey. And it's a very like 1950s like mannerism, like martini dry type feeling, show. And that's kind of like Ailes too. And so he started all of that, and that like proved to be his calling. And he was like a wonder kid in that. Like he rose from gopher to executive producer by age of 25. So he had this really uncanny feel for stagecraft and how to make conversational performances pop on live television.
Mm-hmm.
So it was there that he met Richard Nixon, whose horrible debate performance against John F. Kennedy had like doomed his presidential bid in 1960.
Yeah.
So Nixon was on a media tour to like rehabilitate his image. And waiting with Nixon in the office before the show, Ailes needled his guest and said, "The camera doesn't like you." Nixon was not pleased. And he said, "Oh, it's a shame a man has to use gimmicks like television to get elected." I think he said it that way.
That sounds exact. I thought it was Nixon in the room.
And Ailes said, "Television is not a gimmick. And if you think it is, you'll lose again." So this exchange was a defining moment for both of them. So Nixon hired Ailes to market him to the American public. So he leaves his job at the Mike Douglas Show and he goes to work for Nixon as his executive producer for television. And they that's where he started experimenting with like blurring the line between journalism and politics. And he started working on like manipulating a political image for TV. Right. And he knew that Nixon was like a disaster on television. And so what he did, this is actually kind of funny quote. This is what he told Joe McGinnis, who wrote a book called The Selling of the President, 1968. "He looks like somebody hung him in a closet overnight, and he jumps out in the morning with his suit all bunched up and starts running around saying, 'I want to be president.'" Which seems true. So he knew that, like, you couldn't put Nixon in a room with a reporter and have it go well on live TV. Yeah. So the only hope was to go around the press and go directly to the people. So they basically started a television show where Nixon traveled around the country and did like town halls that were packed with GOP partisans, an applause machine, Ailes called them. That's all they are. And they would field questions from 6 voters, hand-selected by the campaign, who could be counted on to lob softball questions to Nixon's talking points.
This sounds very similar to Trump's current and previous campaign.
Well, Ailes really helped Trump with his campaign a lot.
Oh, I'm sure.
So, yeah. So, I mean, they, basically were like, this is what he said: "The events are not staged. They were fixed," said Rick Perlstein. And he was the author of Nixonland, The Rise of a President and Fracturing of America. Mm-hmm. People are supposed to ask tough questions, but asking a tough question, let alone knowing how to follow up, is a skill. Taking that task out of the hands of reporters and putting it into the hands of inexperienced amateurs was brilliant in itself. So basically, Ailes knew people wouldn't like hit back on the president for answers, right?
Right. So when he spins it, they're not going to be like, "But no, answer the question."
Right. Yeah, you didn't answer the question, Mr. Nixon. Right. Yeah. So as for actual journalists, fuck them, Ailes said. "It's not a press conference. It's a television show. Our television show. And the press has no business on the set. So he made the reporters watch the events backstage on a TV monitor, just like the rest of America. So he wouldn't even let him in the room. So the funny thing is, and this is the other Hitler-esque turn, is as soon as Nixon was elected, Ailes was fired by the White House. Nixon was upset with Ailes for the things that he had said to McGinnis about in the book, because Ailes, of course, built himself up, and Nixon took it as a personal snub. And so he fired him. So on his own, he briefly went back to the theater. So this is Hitler number 3 option. He actually hooked up with Kermit Bloomgarden, the famed producer of Death of a Salesman, and set out to conquer Broadway. Their first production, an environmental-themed musical called Mother Earth, flopped after just a dozen performances in 1978, nearly bankrupting Ailes. Now, again, if he had been more successful as a Broadway producer, would we be in the mess that we're in today?
I mean, especially making something about environmentalism.
I know, isn't that weird? But yeah, he did have some success on Broadway, but he just couldn't stay out of politics. So by 1974, he'd gotten a job at the Television News Incorporated, TNI. Now, I'd never heard of this news network, but I will say I was born in 1975. So again, I wasn't even born when this happened.
Yeah.
But this was, oh boy, this was launched by brewing magnate Joseph Coors. Thanks, Coors. And it was designed to inject a far-right slant into local news broadcasts by providing news clips that stations could use without credit for a fraction of the true cost of production. Once the affiliates got hooked on discounted clips, Coors explained, TVN would gradually, subtly, slowly interject our philosophy in the news. The network was, in the words of the news director who quit in protest, a propaganda machine.
It sounds like Sinclair.
Yeah, right? So a bunch of people quit. So Ailes was brought in to command the newsroom. And he was supposed to, he was like the godfather behind the scenes. And their motto was fair and balanced, which he would take later on for Fox News.
Jesus.
So during...
These guys all recycle each other.
Yeah.
They just all do. I mean, Keep America Great or Make America Great was another one of those ones. Like, that was a Reagan slogan. These guys don't have any original ideas.
No, this is all Ailes. He's there the whole way. He worked for Reagan. Yeah,
absolutely.
Probably was him.
Yeah.
So for Ailes, it was a way to extend the kind of fake news that he was already regularly using as a political strategist. And he said, I know certain techniques, such as you use a press release that looks like a newscast. So you use it because you want your man to win. So he even signed an open-ended contract to produce propaganda for the federal government, providing news clips and scripts to the U.S. Information Agency, a hand-in-glove relationship with the Ford administration that Ailes insisted created no conflict of interest. But luckily, TVN collapsed in 1975. They were losing money and unable to control their journalists. And that taught Ailes a lesson about controlling his journalists, which did happen at Fox News.
Yeah.
So following that, he started doing political consulting, and that's where he worked with Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. And that's where you see the Horton campaign happen. It was not good.
Nope.
So then in 1988, this is with the senior George Bush, Ailes rigged an interview about the scandal with Dan Rather of CBS News by insisting on an odd caveat. And this is the scandal of the Iran-Contra with George H.W. Bush. So he insisted that the interview be conducted live. That not only gave the confrontation of the air of a prize fight, but it enabled him to sit just off the camera in Bush's office, prompting his candidate with cue cards. So as soon as Rather, who was in the CBS studio in New York, began his questioning, Bush came out swinging, claiming that he had been misled about the interview's focus on Iran-Contra. When the exchange got tricky for Bush, Ailes flashed a card that said "walked off air." And a few months earlier, Rather had stormed off camera upon learning that his newscast had been preempted by a women's tennis match. So Bush proceeded to hit rather below the belt. He said, "It's not fair to judge my whole career by a rehash on Iran," he said. "How would you like it if I judged your career by those 7 minutes when you walked off set?" It was the mother of all false equivalencies, the fleeting petulance of a news anchor pitted against the high crimes of a sitting vice president.
Right.
But it worked on TV. So that bite of Bush telling rather off played over and over and over again, said Roger Stone, the infamous political operative who'd worked with Ailes on the Nixon campaign. It was a perfect example of Roger understanding the news cycle, the dynamics of the situation, and the power of television. So he goes through this political consulting, and then he makes this show of I'm leaving politics, right?
Right.
He said in 1991 to the New York Times that I've been in politics for 25 years. It's always been a detour. Now my business has taken a turn back to my entertainment and corporate client. But instead of giving up his work as a political consultant, Ailes simply went underground. So he was so involved in the Bush re-election campaign behind the scenes that they called him our deep throat. He helped the president prep for the State of Union address in 1992. He kept working behind the scenes. And then Bush lost. And so he kind of lost some more face there.
Right.
But so he went back. He was doing TV on the forefront. He helped launch the Maury Povich show. He consulted on A Current Affair. But in 1993, the year after he claimed he'd retired from corporate consulting, he inked a secret deal with tobacco giants Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds to go full force after the Clinton administration on its central policy objective, healthcare reform. Hillary Care was to have been funded in part by $1 a pack tax on cigarettes. To block the proposal, Big Tobacco paid Ailes to produce ads highlighting real people affected by taxes. According to internal memos, Ailes also explored how Philip Morris could create a phony front group called the Coalition for Fair Funding of Healthcare to deploy the same kind of independent ads that had produced Willie Horton. And in a precursor to the modern Tea Party, Ailes conspired with the tobacco companies to unleash angry phone calls on Congress, cold calling smokers and patching them through to switchboards on Capitol Hill, and to gin up the appearance of grassroots uprising, busing 17,000 tobacco employees to the White House for a mass demonstration. Now, what is it they're always accusing liberals of doing? Busing people in for demonstrations?
We're always busing people into different places, whether it's to vote or, we bring them, we pack them in from other places. But it's always that thing of the thing that they are accusing Democrats of is usually always the thing that they're actually doing because they're the ones who had the idea in the first place.
Exactly. So in August of 1993, he actually became the head of CNBC, America's top business network. And he was there for 3 years. And he quadrupled profits and minted stars like Chris Matthews and Maria Bartiromo. But during that time, when he was the head of CNBC, he was still pocketing $5,000 a month as a retainer from Philip Morris to be available in case they needed him.
I mean, can I just get $5,000 a month to be available for someone? I mean, just if you need to talk, I'm here. I don't know what I'm much of an expert in, but I can become an expert.
Right.
If you need me to.
So Jack Welch owned NBC and CNBC and all that kind of stuff. He was the CEO of GE.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically, in a move that took Ailes by surprise, they decided to shut down the show that he'd been producing, America's Talking, and hand its channel over to an all-news venture called MSNBC. Ailes did not like this. And so he secured his release from his NBC contract with a non-compete agreement. And in the movie, The Loudest Voice, this is the first scene. He's going to Jack's house and secures this non-compete agreement. And then is we're going to get him. And Jack said, we'll rue the day that we let Roger and Rupert team up because they knew right away. So enter Rupert Murdoch, who'd been obsessed with gaining a foothold in the TV news industry. And um, he tried some things. It wasn't like necessarily taking off, but then Roger Ailes came in. And before that, there was already, this idea of like a conservative network, but Roger really like sealed it together. Like there's no doubting that you have to be conservative to work for Fox News. So, but Ailes was determined to not repeat what he saw as the mistakes at TVN. And so before signing on for the network, he did something really odd. He had Murdoch get carriage distribution on cable systems nationwide. So normally, cable outfits like Time Warner pay the content providers like CNN or MTV for the right to air their programs. But they did it the other way. Murdoch just didn't give Fox News away. He paid cable companies to air it. So to get Fox News into 25 million homes, Murdoch paid cable companies as much as $20 a subscriber. So his offer like shocked the industry. He was prepared to shell out $500 million just to buy a news voice. So even before it took to air, Fox News was guaranteed access to a mass audience, bought and paid for.
Jesus Christ.
Bought and paid for.
Well, and he could do that because he was already a billionaire.
Right. So Ailes was also determined to not let professional ethics of journalism get in the way of his political agenda as they had at TVN.
I mean, why would you?
Right?
Who needs ethics?
So he secured a pliable news staff from NBC, bringing dozens of top staffers with him, like Steve Dosey, who's still freaking there.
Yeah.
Brett Hume, speechwriter for George H.W. Bush, Tony Snow. And then he embarked on purging existing staffers at Fox News. So there was a litmus test, and he was going to figure out who was liberal or conservative when he came in and try to get rid of the liberals. And so if a journalist wasn't far enough right for his taste, he'd like spring on them and be like, "Why are you a liberal?" And if they had worked at other news networks, he would force them to defend themselves for working there. Like CBS, he called the communist broadcast system. And to replace all these people he was firing, he brought in inexperienced up-and-comers, enabling him to weave his own political biases into the network's DNA.
That's right. Because that's what he did with Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham as well, right? Yeah, we've already talked about them.
Yep. So then he starts going in, and this is one of the things that he was like really paranoid about was he was convinced that the gays were out to get him.
Why are all of these guys so concerned with gay people?
So it says in 1989, he'd broken up a protest of Rudy Giuliani's speech by gay activists, grabbing a demonstrator by the throat and shoving him out the door. And from then he just like lived in fear that they'll be out to get him. And he like stood in his...
All these, like every single person that we've talked about so far has had some sort of agenda against gay people. What is their deal? Whether it's Mike Pence or Laura Ingraham or Sean Hannity or, I mean,
it's a good point.
Honestly, the only person who's been somewhat okay with gay people has been Donald Trump. And ew, gross. That's the only person that we're talking about who's okay with gay people.
Well, I think it just goes to show that when you're like, when you have these fears and this is your mentality, is that you're more likely to believe and spread fake news. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, he started running Fox News and, they had the whole George W. Bush 2000 thing. So this is the thing that was really bad about this. So the man that he tapped to head the network's decision desk on election night, the consultant responsible for calling states for either Gore or Bush, was none other than John Prescott Ellis, Bush's first cousin. And as a columnist at the Boston Globe, Ellis had recused himself from covering the campaign. And he said, "There was no way for you to know if I'm telling you the truth about George W. Bush presidential's campaign," he told his reader, "because in this case, my loyalty goes to him and not to you." So any other newsroom would have not put this man on the decision desk to call the race for his first cousin, who he'd already said he couldn't be, unbiased about, right? So Ailes later told Congress at a hearing, "We at Fox News do not discriminate against people because of their family connections." So on election day, Ellis was in constant contact with Bush himself. After midnight, when a wave of late numbers showed Bush with a narrow lead, Ailes jumped on the data to declare Bush the winner, even though Florida was still rated too close to call by the vote tracking consortium used by all the networks. Hume announced Fox's call for Bush at 2:16 a.m., a move that spurred every other network to follow suit and led Bush to win headlines in the morning papers. And they said, we'll never know whether Bush won the election in Florida or not, says Dan Rather, who was anchoring the election coverage for CBS that night. But when you reach these kind of situations, the ability to control the narrative becomes critical. Led by Fox, the narrative began to be that Bush had won the election. So this is what the writer of this article says. Dwell on this for a moment. A news, quote unquote, network controlled by a GOP operative who had spent decades shaping just such political narratives, including those that help elect the candidate's father, declared George W. Bush the victor, based on the analysis of a man who had proclaimed himself to be loyal to Bush over the facts.
Yeah. And I mean, I was in Florida when all of that happened, so there's even so much more.
Yes, there is.
All the way up to like the Secretary of State and how she was connected as well. So there's just a lot of stuff.
So Ailes continued to like advise Bush, and basically, when 9/11 happened, Ailes sent a back-channel memo to the president through Karl Rove advising Bush to ramp up the war on terror. As reported by Bob Woodward, Ailes advised Bush that the American people would tolerate waiting and be patient, but only as long as they were convinced that Bush was using the harshest measures possible. And, of course, Fox News backed all that up and, put all that propaganda out there to help that stay in line.
Yes.
So, despite everything, Murdoch and Ailes didn't necessarily have the best relationship at the end, even though profits were soaring. It just became contentious. Like he said, he's fucking crazy.
Right.
One thing that was unusual in here. So in 2009, Ailes earned a pay package of $24 million, a deal slightly larger than the one enjoyed by Murdoch himself. It was kind of funny.
Murdoch didn't only just have Fox News.
Right. No, for sure. Just was kind of funny.
Yeah.
One of the things that they also say in one of these articles is that he understands that people watch television with their emotions, and he doesn't care about facts or journalism. Like, he is playing a game with people's emotions, and that's it.
Right.
And he will give them exactly what they want to hear. So the other thing I want to talk about really quick, and I know I've gone way over on my time,
that's fine.
But so the loudest voice in the room. So the reason I brought up Michael Wolff is because Michael Wolff wrote a review of The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman. And it's very clear in here that Michael Wolff does not like Gabriel Sherman at all. And he basically defends Ailes and says that, all the people who were his sources are either mad at Roger or have a vendetta against Roger. And I will say there's another article that I want to reference by the New York Times called "It's a Fact, Mistakes Are Embarrassing in the Publishing Industry." And it talks about fact-checking books, which we've done an episode about that.
Right.
Gabriel Sherman spent $100,000 of his advance fact-checking his book. And it doesn't really go into what that result was, but he did a lot of fact checking for this book. So It wasn't like he just wrote what he wanted as a gossip column and then called it a day. The other reviews that I saw that I read, there's one by the LA Times, which is a really good one. I really just enjoyed this article. It was called Roger Ailes' Biography, Loudest Voice is Reasonably Fair and Balanced. And it goes through it, and it's a good article. I would look that one up. There's another one by NPR basically reviewing it, saying, yeah, it's good. So everybody else is kind of on the agreement that the book is fine. I didn't find anything that said there's a bunch of mistakes or that it's not true or anything like that.
Right.
And actually, I'm saying this NPR article is about the show. So it says Showtime's takes on the rise and fall of Fox News, Roger Ailes, and The Loudest Voice. This guy kind of liked it. He didn't love it, but he wasn't saying that it wasn't true. So Michael Wolff is pretty much the only one out there saying that there's a problem with the book. And I pulled up an article in the Hollywood Reporter called Michael Wolff on Roger Ailes' Final Days and a Complicated Murdoch Relationship. And I just want to read real quickly. This is the last paragraph of this article.
Okay.
It says, more personally, when you're in the media business, what you look for is someone who is at the top of his craft, who understands the real score, who knows how to gossip and who has stories to tell. If you miss knowing Roger, you missed out. Okay, Michael Wolff.
All right. I mean, I could see where Michael Wolff is kind of like a competitor for this guy.
He is, but he's like super a friend of Roger Ailes. Like,
yeah, and
it's really obvious.
Is he saying, are there any examples that he's giving of, oh, this isn't correct? Or is he just like, oh, no, I think this thing is full of errors? But he's not saying what those errors are or if he has proof of the errors.
It's kind of like, it's very nitpicky, first of all. He's like, Sherman is not a very good writer.
I mean, that's a really low blow coming from Michael Wolff. It's not like, I mean, that book was okay, but I wasn't like, woo, I'm blown away by your writing skills.
Yeah. I mean, he says that like, he's got an issue with how he tells the story. He thinks it's awkward, all of this stuff. And it just really speaks to like how it's really just like, you said something mean about my friend and I don't like it. You know, there was one thing in here, though, I'm trying to find it really quick, where he says it's different. So he talks about Sherman is forced to rely on people who will talk to him, and with News Corp, Fox, and Ailes adamantly locked down, almost all of his sources are people out to settle scores with Ailes. Well, there's a lot of people out to settle scores with Ailes because he fucked a lot of people and like literally fucked a lot of people. So
right, and touched a lot of people.
Yeah. So there was one thing though. Oh, this is it. Okay. So this is his big thing. It says Sherman says Ailes called Rupert Murdoch to solicit the job at Fox, while in fact Murdoch tells the story of him calling Ailes first.
That's it.
Yeah, that was it. That's like,
okay, that feels worth it.
Right. That was it.
That feels worth trying to ruin a man's reputation.
Right. I mean, it's just basically him like bitching about Gabe Sherman. Like he obviously does not like him. And he obviously likes Ailes. I mean, he wrote a freaking obituary for him basically when he died and was going to call him the day that he died. And like, I mean, they were obviously friends, obviously. Right. And Michael Wolff, right. What a confusing person. But anyway, that is my very brief overview of Roger Ailes and how
I'm glad you kept it short.
Yeah, right. How he has contributed to fake news. Okay, Kelly, so you've got 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. We can get into it. I actually condensed a lot of the story on my person. So just to round this out, I'm doing Rupert Murdoch.
Yay!
And since you were taking the brunt of this and you were doing what is basically Fox News, like the conception of Fox News, what I did is Rupert Murdoch is so old and he's been a part of so many things that I decided I was going to focus on what he has done to spread fake news in the UK and how he's really messed stuff up there, because we know Fox News has messed stuff up here. I don't need to go really in detail to know that, you know, the Iraq War
right.
and George W. Bush being elected and Trump being elected, none of those things would have happened if Fox News didn't exist. So
right.
I will just jump right in. So Rupert Murdoch, he's 88 years old, young. He's so incredibly old and so incredibly rich. He's worth about $19 billion.
Awesome.
And he is, while he is often cited in America for his founding of Fox News, he has owned and operated newspapers for many decades before Fox News was ever created. In the 1950s and 60s, he was busy buying up papers in Australia, where he's originally from, and New Zealand before he moved to the UK, where he purchased both the News of the World and the Sun in less than 5 years. The News of the World is a Sunday paper. The Sun is a Saturday through Friday paper. It's like a Monday through Saturday paper. So he basically had 7 days worth of a paper.
Oh, wow.
When he bought the Sun. The Sun was originally a more liberal paper. He made it into a very conservative paper. He has had an unbelievable amount of influence across the pond. So I'm going to start with the Sun because the Sun is really where he did the most damage, but then he also completely messed up News of the World as well. And I will tell you how.
Okay.
Let's get into it. So the Sun has been a significant player in politics for multiple decades. It's one of the most highly read papers in the UK and in Ireland. The paper is aimed at the working class, so just bear that in mind. This is not a paper like what he has here is very Wall Street Journal, right. And I believe he also has the Washington Post.
No, that's Bezos.
That's Bezos. Okay. So the Washington Journal, he owns a lot of stock type papers. And then he has Fox News, which I would say Fox News is very aimed at the working class, but most of his actual news agencies would not be. So in 1970, he included something in the Sun that still, I think they still have it today. I haven't seen the Sun in a really long time because it's not like my in-laws get the Sun when I'm in Ireland. But they have a page 3 model. And if you don't know what a page 3 model is a topless woman on the page 3 of the newspaper. So page 1 is the first page. You open it up, right there in your face is a woman who is at least topless, sometimes completely nude.
What? Why?
In your newspaper. Because it was mostly bought by men going to work on a building site. Like that's what they thought of in terms of here's what men are going to want. And it was in the 1970s and there was, I don't know, because people like boobs. I mean, wow. I don't mind boobs, but I don't want them in my news.
Yeah, that's weird.
So, but it's been a thing for years. And for years and years, people used to joke about how Europeans were so much, more free with their nudity and their sexuality. And I'm always like, they really aren't though. It's just page 3 and people really bitched about it for a long time. So it was still a very conservative newspaper. They endorsed Margaret Thatcher for the prime minister in 1979. They supported her Falklands War, going so far as to call other news outlets traitors for questioning government reports of the war. The Sun was very much Fox News, making themselves as close to propaganda as they possibly could legally. But of course, the Fox News wasn't, or the fake news, that was a fox paw. It was a fox paw, if you will. The fake news wasn't just about politics, of course. The Sun created fake news stories about Elton John hiring young boys for sex that resulted in one of the largest payouts in British history for libel. They continually printed homophobic articles and rants, things so far as saying that they would pay any gay men in England to fly one way to a different country.
Oh, Jesus.
Which is,
another
super respectful.
Super awesome.
Yeah. So they basically were trying to play to their base.
Yeah.
So one of the things the Sun is actually the most famous for is actually their coverage of a disaster called the Hillsborough disaster. And the Hillsborough disaster happened in 1989. 96 people who were, I believe they were all Liverpool football fans, lost their lives. They were at the Sheffield Stadium and back then they didn't used to have seats. Seats weren't mandatory. So you'd have open areas that were fenced in for your away fans. And the police and the ambulance workers let too many people in, and people were they were crushed at the front. A lot of children were killed.
Yeah.
And there were over 700 people injured. 96 people died. 4 days after the tragedy, the Sun took its front cover and decided to, instead of remembering the people who died, they devoted the entire front page to smearing the Liverpool fans, claiming that they picked the pockets of the dead and urinated on rescue workers and a whole bunch of other really, really detestable things.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, it's awful. It's awful. And the story was shocking, but because of what they said, they sort of seeded doubt in the eyes of the public and also politicians. So when the families of the victims fought for their family's justice, it took decades for them to get any sort of final answer. And the final inquest that determined the police and ambulance workers were at fault for the disaster, as well as the design of the stadium itself, that took until 2016.
You know, it's funny because when you first started telling this story, I was like, wait a second. Are we doing My Favorite Murder or are we doing our podcast? Because I feel like they told that story. It sounds so familiar.
They might have. Yeah. I mean, it's a very, very famous disaster. I don't remember them talking about it, but they could have.
Yeah, or
they very well
if it wasn't that one, it was something very similar. But what you're talking about just sounds so familiar. So anyway.
Yeah. So the Sun has had to, the editor who was in charge at that time came out and publicly apologized and then later recanted and said that he only apologized because Murdoch made him apologize.
Okay. Awesome.
It was said that Murdoch was the only person who could have stopped that front page, and he did not, though. Mm-hmm. So there's that as well.
Right.
But of course, that's not the only controversy that the Sun has endured, because in 1997, not that this is a controversy, but in 1997, after having been on the side of, so in England, in the UK, just in England, actually, the Conservative Party, so the Republican Party, would be called the Tories, mm-hmm. and the Democrats or the Liberals would be called the Labour or Labour Union Party or New Labour. They also have multiple little parties, but those are mostly just they still only fall one way or the other for the most part.
Right.
So in 1997, Murdoch and the Sun supported New Labour with centrist Tony Blair.
Okay.
Remember him?
Yeah, I remember him.
He became a close friend and a godfather of one of Murdoch's children until they fell out after it came out that Tony Blair might have potentially had an affair with Wendy, who is Murdoch's ex-wife.
Oh.
Yeah. So there is some controversy about that. I did not have the kind of time to look into whether or not they had an affair, but apparently there are some documents that she wrote that he ended up publishing in one of his many, many media outlets, and basically just trying to ruin her reputation.
You know, Roger Ailes did not like Wendy because she was liberal and she was trying to push Murdoch towards more liberal causes and pushing him, like, according to what I saw on The Loudest Voice.
I can see that.
And I thought that was interesting. So that was part of their contention, too, at the end, was that Ailes didn't get along with Wendy. Wendy hated him.
Yeah. Well, they divorced in 2013. And all of these articles about Tony Blair and Wendy came out, I think, in 2014. So it's not been super long.
Right.
But as far as I know, at least for a couple of years, he has been dating Jerry Hall. Oh. Murdoch has, not Tony Blair.
Right.
Tony Blair is supposedly still married to his wife. And I mean, he is not affair material, but I guess if the person you're married to is Rupert Murdoch, maybe Tony Blair looks good in comparison. I don't know.
Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. So Murdoch later supported David Cameron, who was conservative leader, and he was also the leader who called for the Brexit referendum vote.
Okay.
Which, I mean, could be important because I do know that Murdoch was not a fan of the European Union and was very much interested in pushing the Brexit. The Sun definitely had plenty of articles about how being in the EU was like being in prison for the UK and that they deserved better and they could keep all their money. But it's also obviously better for him in the long run. It's going to make him more money either way.
Right.
So,
you mean this is all about money?
Yeah, I think the important thing to know with Rupert Murdoch is that this is always all about money.
Money and power.
It's all about money. Money brings the power,
Right.
and money is how he uses his power.
Right.
But yeah, ultimately, money is the goal. It's not, he does not have, there's no loyalty. This is not a Trump situation where everyone has to plead loyalty to him.
No, not at all.
And I think that's one of the reasons why, remember, we did talk about in Fire and Fury, where Rupert Murdoch was not a huge fan of Trump.
He's not.
He was friends with Jared Kushner, who was another money person. Not a very good money person because he bought that shit in Brooklyn for way overpriced and he'll never sell it. But he comes from a lot of money. Like his whole family is that money.
Fox News actually supported John Kasich and got him basically elected to be the governor of Ohio. And I think Kasich was actually Murdoch's choice. Like, I think that's who he actually wanted. And because they tried to rein in Ailes on not promoting a candidate over another one in the primary. And of course, Ailes was like secretly directing Trump the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, even the Mercers didn't want Trump in the beginning either.
No, they didn't. But, you know, I think if you remember John Kasich, like he was in the primary to the freaking bitter end at 1%.
Yeah.
And I was always like, dude, like, what are you going to, like, seriously, like, you're not going to win this. Like, this isn't happening. But he wouldn't drop out and he wouldn't drop out and he wouldn't drop out. And I do kind of wonder if he was getting a lot of funding from Murdoch in order to be able to stay in.
Not that I saw. I will say I'll get into it later, but I went to Open Secrets, which has, I mean, I'm not going to say they have every single donation, but they have most of them available. And I didn't see that he donated to any 2016 candidate.
Well, I still think that could have been done covertly.
Could have been. It could have been. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at it. There might have been some just like RNC donations.
Right.
Maybe a super PAC donation. I know there were some in the history, but as I was going through, I don't remember seeing any.
I didn't research any of that. I just thought it was very curious that Kasich came up through Fox News. Then basically it said like Fox News got him elected as the governor. And then when his presidential bid came up, you know, Ailes supported Trump over him, but he just stayed in for so freaking long. I just thought that was weird.
That is weird. So I'll get back into this. So Murdoch clearly has no party but himself, and he will shift to whomever is able to make him the best deal. There are rumors that one of the reasons that he supported Blair was because Blair had promised to not push the UK into the euro exchange, so keeping the British pound sterling instead of going to the euro, that's the standard throughout almost all of Europe, uses the euro so that they have a standard currency so that when you travel, which I will tell you as a person who travels to Northern Ireland and often goes into Ireland, it is a pain in the ass. They all create their own money.
Yeah.
So everything looks different. So I'll take my money from Northern Ireland over to England and they're like, this looks weird. And I'm like, I know, it all looks weird to me. But if I take it down to say I'm in Northern Ireland and I go to Letterkenny, which is like 20 minutes outside of Northern Ireland, I have to go to an ATM and get euros out because they won't accept my pound sterling, even though I've legitimately not gone really anywhere but like 20 miles down the street.
Right. Oh,
or 20 minutes down the street rather. So yeah, it's a pain in the butt, and it's one of those things where you're like, why did this happen? And it's people like Rupert Murdoch who have made sure, because the pound sterling has always been worth more than the euro, so he would lose money if they went to the euro.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, okay. We can't talk about Murdoch without mentioning the News of the World phone hacking scandal.
Okay.
So I don't know if you remember this, but this wasn't too super long ago. It is a story that really took over the entire news cycle in the UK. And I saw a lot about it here as well. So the controversy included the now shuttered News of the World and other British newspapers owned by Rupert Murdoch. Employees of the newspaper were accused of engaging in phone hacking, police bribery, and exercising improper influence on the pursuit of stories going back to 1990. Investigations conducted from 2005 to 2007 appear to show that the paper's phone hacking activities were limited to celebrities, politicians, members of the British royal family. But then in July of 2011, it was revealed that the phone of a murdered 13-year-old girl whose name was Millie Dowler, the relatives of deceased British soldiers, and the victims of the 7th of July 2005 London bombing had also been hacked. And because of this, there was a huge public outcry against the News Corp and Rupert Murdoch. It led to a lot of people resigning, including Murdoch as the News Corp director over in the UK.
Oh.
During the police investigations into the newspaper phone hacking activities, and this is never, since I heard about this story, this is the thing I have always remembered. So, because this is heartbreaking. During the police investigation into the newspaper's phone hacking activities, detectives discovered that journalists had listened to some messages which were potential evidence in Dowler's, the 13-year-old murdered girl, in her voicemail box. And because they listened to them, they were auto-deleted after 72 hours.
Oh, no.
And those deletions, her parents had been calling and calling and calling, so her mailbox was full. When they deleted, the parents and her everyone in her family and all of her friends thought, oh, she's listening to our messages. She's still alive.
Oh, no.
And that's the part that broke everyone's heart.
Yeah.
Like, that's what captured her story. Everyone was hacked. This was a Panama Papers style story where everyone was being bribed, everyone was being hacked. But at the end of the day, it was this story that really just broke open the whole entire public's heart of this, where they just were like, those poor parents thought their daughter was still alive.
Yeah.
And she was listening to their messages. So they were still calling and leaving these frantic messages.
Right.
So the controversy eventually led to News of the World shutting after 168 years in print. So we know that he has also played a role in American politics, Murdoch has.
Right.
And he describes himself as a libertarian, which makes a lot of sense to me because he doesn't want any taxes.
Right.
No government interference with this money, please. Thank you.
Right.
And he is not Roger Ailes.
He's not.
He donates money to people who are on the left side.
Right.
I'm not going to say he donates money to liberals because I don't know that I think that would be pushing it.
Right.
But he has in the past donated money to Hillary Clinton when she was running in 2006. Yeah. Back in 2006, he donated money to Hillary Clinton. He also, in the 2018 election cycle, did not donate to any Republicans at all in the House or the Senate. He gave small amounts to Democratic candidates Joe Manchin, Joe Connolly, and Heidi Heitkamp.
Okay.
And before that, he was giving larger amounts to RNC groups and Republican nominees, as well as Rand Paul, who's also a libertarian.
Yes. Rand Paul.
Yes. I will note there is no listed donation from him at any time to Donald Trump or any other presidential nominee from the 2016 campaign. Due to Murdoch's extended media empire, and it is truly extended, do not think that it is just Fox News and these newspapers over in England and the Washington Journal. Like, he owns HarperCollins books.
He owns a ton in Australia as well.
Yes, he owns in Australia, in New Zealand. He owns
a lot.
He owns media companies everywhere. I mean, that's what Wendy did. She was one of his executives in China. And so there's a lot of stuff that he owns now in China. He is a worldwide mogul. Yes. So we know he affects American politics. We know we wouldn't have a Trump presidency if it wasn't for him.
Which is ironic that he doesn't really like Trump, because it's partly his fault.
It's ironic, but is it really ironic? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, he wants someone that he can control. And I think that's why he doesn't like Trump.
That's an interesting point.
But one thing I will say is that recently the Fox News polls showed 55% of the Fox News viewers agreed that Trump should be impeached, or at least that the impeachment hearings should continue. Trump went ballistic, saying that Fox News must be fake news as well, which is
perfect.
Which is fun. And then William Barr got involved. He met with Murdoch in early October, and we don't know what the meeting was about, but Trump was back to praising his favorite news anchors the day after.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's safe to say that Murdoch holds the Trump card in this relationship.
Probably, yeah. I would think so.
Because I would say that I don't think Trump can get reelected if Fox News does not back him.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is what I have on Rupert Murdoch. He is not a good man, but he is no Roger Ailes.
No.
And he does not like Trump. Doesn't mean he's on our side.
Right.
But he does not like Trump. He's not afraid of fake news, though.
No, and unfortunately, he's a newsman. So, yes that's unfortunate when you own that many news outlets, newspapers, television networks. I'm sure he probably owns radio as well somewhere. But, it's like to own that and then to be okay with fake news, or he doesn't care because all he cares about is money.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, well, we really quick should do our jams. Do you have any idea who goes first this week?
I do. It's you that goes first this week.
Okay. I'm going to do like the quickest jam ever.
Do it. Okay. Do a quick jam.
My jam this week is Bill Withers. I'm going back. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone.
Oh, that's a fantastic song. I love it so much.
I know. I just wanted to do that. It's from his 1971 album, Just As I Am. And it's just, it's like the best ever.
It really is. That's such a great song. When my husband and I when we first met, we lived 3,000 miles apart from one another for like 6 months or 3.5 months of our initial relationship. And we used to make, back in the day, you'd burn the CDs and that song would definitely be on there because, we were very far away from one another.
So really quick, the history of it. He was inspired to write this song after watching the 1962 movie Days of Wine and Roses. And both of the characters were alcoholics and they were alternatively weak and strong. And it's like going back for seconds on rat poison. And sometimes you miss things that aren't particularly good for you. And it just crossed his mind watching the movie that there was probably something else that happened in my life that I'm not aware of. So kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So he was 31 years old when he wrote it, and he was working at a factory making toilet seats for 747s when he wrote the song. So
that's really fascinating.
When the song went gold, the record company presented him with a golden toilet, marking the start of his new career.
Oh,
I didn't know that. Oh,
that's really cool.
Great. All right, that's my golden toilet song of the Jam of the Week. So, what's yours?
My Jam of the Week is we got Disney Plus yesterday, which was the day it came out. I'm very excited about it. It looks really nice. I'm not a huge Disney fan, but they do own like every property now. So,
Sure.
Including Studio Ghibli and the Marvel and Star Wars universe. And last night, after my son went to bed, we sat down and watched the first episode of the new show, The Mandalorian, and it was phenomenal.
Oh, nice.
It was really, really good. Again, I've talked about this before. I'm not a huge 100% Star Wars girl. Down the line, I've gotten into Star Wars in the past 5 years, and that's it. This was great. It was very much a cowboys in space type story, and I'm into that. And the very beginning had Brian Posehn in a very short, small role, and I was so excited to see him.
Nice.
Yeah, and then the ending just... I'm not going to give away the ending, but I will say that both Shay and I audibly looked at one another and audibly were just like, "Oh my god!" And that's not a thing that we do,
right?
So
you can't imagine Shay saying, "Oh my god!"
So I won't give away what it is, but it was pretty amazing.
Nice.
Yeah, so I highly recommend it.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, hey guys. We will be back in a couple of weeks with our final episode. So until then, be sure to check us out on Facebook and Twitter. I'm sure we'll post something. Just kidding.
We will.
At Podcast Fake News. We have our Gmail at podcastfakenews@gmail.com. If you're looking to take over a podcast about fake news, go ahead and hit us up.
Send us an email about that.
Yep. You can read our blog at www.podcastfakenews. That will be up until it expires next year because we've already prepaid for it. So what the hell? Anyway, until next time, don't forget, spread jam.
Not lies.